Another shock from the Pacific. Longtime U.S. partners are drifting. India has edged closer to Beijing. South Korea is voicing frustration, and Japan is weary of paying the economic price for Washington's choices. And now comes the bigger turn. Australia, one of America's most dependable allies, is starting to pivot. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese isn't doing photo ops. He's in Beijing for real talks, signing deals, and opening direct trade channels with China. The game changer? Australian counterparts are already settling payments in Chinese yuan. Every trade settled outside the dollar narrows its reach, and this shift is happening in plain view. A recent $2 billion loan from China, denominated and paid in yuan, pushes that door wider, setting the stage for more financial settlements in China's currency rather than US dollars. And the horizon may tilt even further. Policy circles are now openly debating whether Australia could move toward BRICS. If Canberra takes that step, Washington doesn't just lose a partner, it loses a cornerstone of its Indo-Pacific strategy. That prospect would set off alarms across the White House. So how did it come to this? Who nudged Australia off its old track, and why now? Stay with me. We're going to pull apart the deals, the pressure points, and the choices that brought Australia to this moment. For decades, Australia was counted among America's most reliable allies in the Pacific. Washington could depend on Canberra for military support, intelligence sharing, and strong trade ties. That long-standing trust, however, is now under strain, and the pressure comes from Donald Trump's policies. Trump's new tariffs on Australian steel, aluminum, and agricultural products have struck at the core of the country's economy. These sectors employ thousands and keep regional communities alive. When Washington suddenly raised duties, Australian farmers lost access to their biggest market. Steel and aluminum producers began cutting jobs, and businesses across the supply chain felt the shock. Analysts estimated the damage at around $57 billion when the tariffs were first announced. For many Australians, that figure became a symbol of how much the alliance was costing them rather than supporting them. The frustration quickly moved into politics. Inside Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's cabinet, the debate is no longer behind closed doors. One camp insists that the U.S. remains irreplaceable, pointing to the security umbrella, intelligence cooperation, and American military presence in the Pacific. But another group argues for strategic independence, pushing Australia to diversify and build stronger ties with China, India, and even Russia. The fact that this discussion is now public, aired in Parliament and debated in the media, shows how far the mood has shifted. Albanese's latest visit to China brought the contrast into the open. It wasn't a quick courtesy call. He spent 6 full days in 3 major Chinese cities, held an extended summit with Xi Jinping, and even shared a private lunch with Xi and his wife. These gestures were carefully staged to highlight respect and trust, and the images dominated headlines in both countries. At the same time, Donald Trump canceled his planned meeting with Albanese. In Canberra, that decision stunned officials. On one side, China was signaling warmth and attention. On the other, the US president was sending a message that Australia was not a priority. For many Australians, the comparison was impossible to ignore. The outcome of that trip is now clear. Australia is no longer just repairing old disputes with Beijing. It is moving toward deeper cooperation. Trade agreements, new investments, and political goodwill are all being explored. China has played its hand with patience, offering economic relief and respect. Trump, in contrast, has pushed Australia away through tariffs and indifference. For Washington, the implications are serious. Australia has always been central to US strategy in the Pacific. If Canberra shifts further toward Beijing, the regional balance of power changes, and that change is already underway. To understand the stakes, we need to look closely at what Australia actually represents for the United States. This is far more than a symbolic friendship or polite diplomatic speeches. Australia provides tangible assets that Washington depends on: resources, intelligence, and military cooperation. And all of these are now under question. Start with resources. Australia is among the world's top producers of critical minerals: lithium, rare earths, cobalt, manganese, and nickel. These may sound technical, but they sit at the heart of modern industry. Electric vehicle batteries rely on lithium. Fighter jets cannot fly without powerful magnets made from rare earths. Precision-guided missiles and advanced semiconductors need these minerals in their cores. They are the building blocks of both the green economy and national defense. Right now, China dominates much of the global supply chain for these materials. But Australia is unique. It has the reserves, the infrastructure, and the trust to serve as a democratic alternative. Washington has long recognized this. That's why US officials have been investing in Australian projects to build supply chains that bypass China. Take Lynas Rare Earths, for example. With funding from the Pentagon, the company is constructing a processing facility in Texas, the first of its kind in the US, to reduce reliance on Chinese processors. Another major effort is Iluka's refinery in Western Australia, backed by a $475 million investment from Canberra, which will soon be producing separated rare earths for industries including US defense. Add to this Australia's role in lithium mining. Within a few years, a large share of the world's EV batteries could be powered by Australian lithium. Now picture what happens if Australia drifts away from Washington. Every one of these projects, every supply contract, every plan to diversify, suddenly comes into doubt. The US would find itself vulnerable again, with Beijing holding on to the keys of the global supply chain. That is why this shift is so troubling for American strategists. And the risks don't stop at economics. They cut deep into politics. In Australia, frustration is building. Why remain loyal to a partner that imposes tariffs as if Canberra were an adversary? That sentiment has already reached the highest levels of government. Inside Anthony Albanese's cabinet, two camps have formed. One insists the US remains indispensable, especially for military protection. The other, growing louder, says Australia must pursue strategic independence and expand its partnerships with China, India, and Russia. This debate is no longer whispered behind closed doors. It is being aired in Parliament, argued in newspapers, and broadcast on television. A few years ago, such a conversation would have been unthinkable. But Trump's tariffs shifted the calculation, and Beijing has seized the opportunity to present itself as a reliable partner. China has played a long game with Australia. Even during the years when relations soured and sanctions were in place, Beijing kept its trade links alive. Today, China remains Australia's biggest customer, buying iron ore, coal, and agricultural goods in volumes no other market can match. And now, as ties warm again, Beijing has welcomed Canberra back with remarkable openness. This steady approach is how China extends influence. It doesn't push overnight. It builds step by step, offering stable demand, reliable markets, and gestures of respect. At the same time, Trump's United States has offered tariffs and a cold shoulder. Against that backdrop, Australia's political class is now openly debating something that once seemed unthinkable: a realignment of alliances. The most striking discussions involve BRICS. Reports in international media suggest that Australia could one day lean closer to the bloc while distancing itself from the G7. Some analysts dismiss the idea as unlikely, yet the fact that it is even raised shows how much the global landscape has shifted. BRICS itself is gathering momentum. Dozens of countries have expressed interest in joining, and it increasingly presents itself as an alternative to US-led institutions. If a country like Australia, even as a hypothetical, were to consider this path, it would mark one of the biggest geopolitical jolts in decades. Washington would not only lose an ally, but also a cornerstone of its Pacific strategy. The implications run deep. America's reliance on Australia goes far beyond resources. US military bases, joint naval operations, and intelligence facilities, like those tied into the Five Eyes network, all depend on Australian soil and cooperation. If Canberra tilted toward BRICS, that would open the Pacific wider to Chinese and Russian influence, altering the balance of power across the entire region. This is why the dispute cannot be seen simply as another tariff battle. What is unfolding is about the future of America's role in Asia. For now, Australia is still walking a careful line, balancing ties with both Washington and Beijing. But the trajectory is becoming clearer. Unless Washington moves quickly to repair its relationship, it risks losing its most trusted partner in the Pacific and giving China a victory it has been carefully preparing for. There's another layer to this shift: U.S. military ambitions in the Pacific, especially the Quad. The grouping, America, India, Japan, and Australia, was built to balance China's rise. For a time, it looked cohesive. Recent moves, however, show visible strain. India was supposed to be Washington's anchor in the Quad. That bond has frayed since Donald Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Indian exports. The hit landed hard on steel, aluminum, textiles, and the small manufacturers that feed those sectors. Farmers and factory owners are asking what they gain from leaning on the U.S. when market access keeps narrowing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has responded by reopening channels with Beijing. At the recent SCO summit, Modi and Xi Jinping discussed trade, border stability, and regional coordination. Officials in New Delhi confirmed fresh talks on energy cooperation with China. The message from India is clear: keep options open, balance ties, and avoid being boxed into one camp. That's a notable shift for a country long cast as China's principal counterweight in Asia. Australia faces a similar calculus. U.S. duties, again 50% on steel and aluminum, have stirred frustration within the Albanese government. Canberra is recalculating costs and benefits, and that reassessment echoes across the wider alliance network. Consider Japan and South Korea. They are pillars of America's strategy. Tokyo has negotiated to shield parts of its auto industry, yet companies remain uneasy about rising input costs. Protecting the domestic economy now dominates the agenda, which limits room for hardline postures toward China. Seoul is preparing relief for its exporters as U.S. tariffs bite, and policymakers are asking whether the alliance is becoming too expensive to maintain in its current form. Both capitals stay formally close to Washington, yet their leaders are hedging, much like India and Australia. Meanwhile, Beijing advances quietly. At the SCO, China extended offers of market access, security dialogue, and steadier long-term planning. Across Asia, the contrast is hard to miss. Predictable trade links on one side, tariff shocks on the other. For India, China offers a vast marketplace at a moment when U.S. barriers are rising. For Australia, China is already the top trading partner and is signaling political respect that Canberra hasn't felt from Washington. For Japan and South Korea, stability in flows and pricing matters, and Beijing is positioning itself as the reliable counterpart. Where does this leave the Quad? It hasn't collapsed. Still, the strain is obvious. China gains influence through trade, diplomacy, and patient outreach, methods that steadily pull partners closer. Trump's tariff policy, in turn, nudges America's own friends to look elsewhere. Albanese's approach is increasingly Australia first: diversify trade, protect autonomy, and avoid automatic alignment. The open question lingers: how many allies can Washington afford to alienate before it repairs these relationships? To stay updated, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll be following the next moves closely, because the pieces on this board are shifting faster than anyone expected.